Jay Rayner is one of the most influential food writers around. He is an award-winning journalist, broadcaster and food critic. Jay regularly appears for the BBC on MasterChef and The One Show. He is also a restaurant critic for The Observer. And whether Jay is talking about food sustainability and food politics, or simply putting the fear of God into a contestant on MasterChef, he'll always give an informed, forthright and sometimes controversial view. As part of our ongoing commitment to our clients, today we're talking menu science at Law Creative. And right here, right now, we're very pleased to welcome Jay Rayner to join us. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you for having me.
So first up, and to kick the session off, do menus really matter?
Menus are hugely important. The menu is the interface, to use a really grand word, between the kitchen and the diner. There's a whole bunch of cooks in the kitchen doing stuff with ingredients, and there's a whole bunch of people at the tables who need to know what they want to eat. Okay. So you need a document. I mean, the alternative is that someone comes out and recites exactly the same menu, but that's not going to work, is it? That's going to be really boring to listen to. So you do need a written sheet of paper.
Okay. Do menus provide a positive return on investment in terms of branding?
A positive return, well, as you have to have one, yes. And to be more specific, they can certainly provide a negative investment. In other words, if you write a really, really bad menu, which leaves your diners sitting at the table wanting to bang a fork into their forehead because there's nothing there they want to eat, or it's overwritten, or it doesn't encourage the appetite, they might get up from the table and leave, or they might never come back again. Okay. So, you know, the menu is very, very important.
How much product description do you like to see on a menu?
One of the reasons many people go into cooking is because that's what they're good at. It's not because they could have written the great British novel or become a screenwriter. It's because they want to cook. Yes. And the same tends to apply to restaurateurs. People in the restaurant business don't tend to be brilliant with words. I don't run a restaurant. I'm not bad with words. It's all about skill sets. Yes. It does matter how they're written. Now, some of this is to do with changes in taste. If you go back to the 70s, you'd see a menu and it would be very, very florid, and that was the way they were always written because eating out was such an unusual thing within our society. Now, we're much more used to the idea. And I would say there is a growing taste for simplicity. As a writer, I would say simplicity is and a diner, okay. Simplicity is always better. There is a tendency to literally over-egg the pudding, both in the dish and on the menu, and I would desperately warn against it.
Okay. And in terms of simplicity you mentioned there, does that apply to numbers of dishes as well? So sometimes we see, you know, hundreds of dishes, and it gives a lot of variety, but, you know, is less more?
I write a restaurant column and have done so for 15 years. So I've eaten an awful lot of restaurants, and I have various rules of thumb that I stick with. One is be very suspicious of an overly long menu. Okay. There are very few kitchens which can really cook so many dishes. Okay. That they just don't have the skills to do it. So if they're telling you that they can do 30 starters and 30 mains, either they're lying, or, and here's the second point, they have bought in most of their food from a food service company. Right. One of the other points I make is, you know, when people write up menus on blackboards and it says at the bottom some dishes may contain nuts, they're putting that there because they don't know what it contains because they bought it in from somewhere else. So overly long is definitely not a good idea.
You'd be worrying about the sound of a microwave with an overly long menu.
With an overly long menu, I'd be absolutely convinced there was a microwave and a freezer and a deep fat fryer. Now, all of these things have their place in our lives. Yes. I have a freezer, I have deep fat fried things. I don't have a microwave, but that's just a personal taste. But you don't want to think that your food is being prepared as a matter of expediency.
Okay. How often should a restaurant change its menu?
I travel an awful lot, and I spend an awful lot of time in certain hotels, and coming across the same menu time and time again is tedious. But it's also not just tedious for the diner, it's tedious for your kitchen.
Yes.
So if you want to get the best people into your kitchen, you need to give them reasons to stay, reasons so that they don't feel like they're turning up for work and just doing the same thing day after day after day. So it makes an absolute sense, not necessarily, depending on what kind of business you want to run, to have a completely changing menu every day because there are certain bankers that everybody will want. Yes. You know, you'll want your steak and chips and so forth. But to have an area on your menu which can change by the week, by the day, it makes absolute sense, both front of house and back of house.
So a special section.
Yeah, and a special section is a brilliant way of using up those ingredients you over-ordered in the kitchen. You've got things left over, so what are you going to do with them?
So Jay, Many of our clients work in the hotel industry, and often they have hotels in city centre locations. So it's a very competitive environment when it comes to getting guests to stay in their restaurants. How can hotels improve their guest diner ratio?
By not looking like a hotel when it comes to the restaurant. You're absolutely right that most city centre hotels are going to have an enormous amount of competition on their doorsteps, and that's only increasing.
Yes.
I've been to hotels in New York where they don't even bother to have a restaurant anymore, because why should they, it being New York and they're surrounded by them. The key thing is to try and think of a way to unbrand yourself, to make it look like this restaurant is as individual as any of those out on the street. It's a very difficult game to play, because obviously the hotel business wants to big up who they are, but at the same time that can actually be quite off-putting if you feel you're part of a slightly vacuum-packed experience. So it's about making the restaurant look as though it is merely a part of the estate rather than a part of the brand.
So would something like an entrance directly to the outside help with that, rather than having to walk through the hotel to the restaurant?
Yeah, dedicated entrances to restaurants within hotels are pretty much mandatory now, I think.
Okay.
If you don't do that, you are just saying we're the place with the breakfast buffet where the eggs fester under the heat lamps, and nobody likes that. And actually that is kind of a key point, because hotels have basic functions they have to carry out. Breakfast is one of them.
Really important.
Trying to avoid your staff relaying tables for breakfast as you're finishing dinner is a really good idea. But also just having some personality on the menu. Don't try to necessarily look like you're trying to be all things to all people.
Are restaurants innovative enough when it comes to menus?
I think when it comes to hoteliers, they often try too hard to attract everybody to their restaurant. The holy grail, it has to be said, is not just keeping diners in your restaurant from your hotel, it's to actually bring them in from outside. Absolutely. And for it to become a destination. What you tend to see are menus that are too long, menus that are overwritten, and menus that are using the English language like it was a blunt instrument to try and drag you in.
What could possibly annoy you on a menu?
Shall I take you through the things
Take
that
me
drive
through.
me?
I can imagine there's a few.
Overuse of adjectives.
Okay.
It's crispy, it's soft, it's luscious, it's... Don't tell me what it is, let me find out for myself. Okay. There's a thing I call kitchen sinking, which is when you list every single item that's on the plate, and maybe that went into the mise en place of the dish as well. So, you know, it's olive oil, fried mirepoix of that. Stop it. Blue chipping, where you're trying to overclaim for every ingredient that they are the most glorious, brilliant ingredient that's ever be found. Too many technical terms. I remember once seeing a menu which talked about a soup being liaised with olive oil. Now, to liaise is a term from Escoffier, the great French chef from the early 20th century. You don't need to see that, it's antiquated. What's more, he misspelt it on his menu. All of those things are actually a turn-off.
Okay.
When you sit down at a restaurant table, usually you're hungry.
Yes.
If you in a hotel, you've been traveling, you're tired. You want to sit down and you don't want to be bombarded with words. You just want to see things that sound like there's something you want to eat.
So it sounds like when it comes to your restaurant or restaurant experience or menu experience, it's very much about you being in control and you making the decision. So you don't want to be too led when it comes to...
Well, it's a mixture of the two, isn't it? I mean, if the menu writer is clever, they are actually leading you by the nose.
Yes.
We know that there are little bits of research that have been done which show that if you place a particular dish in a box on the top right-hand corner, people's eyes will drift up there. And either you can put the cheap option of the day or the most expensive option of the day and see whether it sells. There are things you can do.
So Jay, we're talking about menu science today. Do you believe it is a science?
I understand why people talk about menu science, not least because we want to be comforted by the idea of knowing that there's a hard base of research under the things that we do in a business environment. I would have to say, from my experience as a reporter of a lot of science-based stories, particularly around food, I don't think it quite ticks the boxes as being rigorously researched in a true scientific method. Okay. That said, there are bits of practice that can be repeated which clearly have an impact. So we do know that if you put certain things in the top right-hand corner of a menu in a box, you can flog more of those either cheaply or more expensively. And we're clear that if the point size is too small, people are going to get bored. We know there are certain things that can be done. A lot of it after that is trial and error and to do with taste and the taste of the audience you're trying to reach.
If sushi has overshadowed Italian in recent times, what do you think the key trends will be moving forward?
I've learned from long experience in the journalism business that predicting what's going to happen in the future is a dangerous game because most of the time you're wrong. But I tend to think it's always about more of the same. So what we're seeing emerge on the high street at the moment is dirty Americana, quality hamburgers, American barbecue, fried chicken pimped up.
Yes.
And I suspect we're going to see more of that in the restaurant sector, although there are certain parts of London where it's amazing to think there could be more of that. I think we're going to see more of that. And I wouldn't be surprised to see certain hotels start to rebrand their restaurants to be in that sector as well.
Tell me the type of menu that would make your heart drop.
The first thing is the overly laminated menu, the overly printed heavy menu. I'm not entirely sure why restaurants ever do it. I'm sure that they think, well, if we do something hard-wearing, that's a cost up front and we won't have to spend that money ever again. But they end up looking very, very greasy and tired very, very quickly. Plus they look overly corporate. When you go into a restaurant, you want to feel there is a human being feeding you. So the overly corporate menu, it costs almost nothing to print a menu on the day out of your laser printer on a nice piece of paper. Then there is the overwritten menu, which is trying to tell you what to think. So it will tell you that something is delicious or that something is a treat for the taste buds, which is the kind of writing I would get sacked for. If you ever see words like mouth-watering on a menu, the mouth waters as a physiological fact. So don't tell me that's what your food is going to do. All of those things, the overwriting, are going to make my heart fall. What I do want to see is a simple description of a dish. So if it says, people know I love pork belly. So if it says pork belly with roast apples and mashed potato, all right, I'm there, I'm sold. If it said luscious West Country pork roasted till the crackling could crack and be heard from 40 paces with the finest Kentish Bramley apples roasted to a caramelized, oh, stop it. In the end, what matters is what's going to come out the kitchen. And the menu is a cue to make me think that these people are going to feed me well.
In other facets of our life, it's all around personalisation and providing a very personal experience. Do you think that will ever apply to restaurants?
The whole point of restaurants is that they should be a personal experience. The best restaurants, these tend to be standalone restaurants, not necessarily in a hotel environment, do make you feel like they were waiting for you, that's why they were there. I've often said that the best front of house staff are basically sociopaths who get their kicks out of showing people a good time. That's why they're in the restaurant business, even though it's bizarre. You want to feel while you're sitting at the table that the rest of the world has gone away. The very best restaurants actually do stop the world at the door. And in you come, and everything will be fine for the hour and a half, 2 hours that you're sitting at the table. So yes, it ought to be a very personal business.
So Jay, I have an iPad here.
Yes.
Do you like menus on iPads?
No, I do not like menus on iPads. That is like a day at the office.
Okay. Should restaurants recommend wines with dishes?
If a restaurant suggests a wine alongside a dish, ideally by the glass, that can add value to the experience. But it's got to be an expression of a wider wine list. So if your wine list is only 10 whites and 10 reds, proposing a single glass with a dish isn't going to make much sense because it's not like you've got a massive selection anyway. If your wine list, however, is 30 pages with different banks of the River Rhone represented and far-flung places in India and Hungary, then yes, selecting a few gems that you might not necessarily find yourself makes a lot of sense.
How much does a menu give you an insight into what's happening in a kitchen?
The menu should give you a full insight into what's going on in that kitchen. It should be an expression of what these clever people who have spent years learning to cook are able to do. One of the risks is that you build your menu from the dining room backwards. In other words, you write a fantasy menu for the sort of food you would like to be able to serve people without actually checking whether the kitchen can do it. Your menu should be written kitchen forwards into the dining room. This is what the kitchen can do. This is what they're able to do. This is their skill set, and this is how they're going to express it.
So Jay, tell me, would you open your own restaurant?
There is no way I would open my own restaurant, mostly because I know what a difficult business it is. My understanding of the restaurant business comes from sitting at a table with a knife and fork in my hand and a napkin around my neck, screaming, "Feed me," and what I think works and what I think doesn't. But I've also done quite a lot of reporting work around the business side of them. I know how tough it is. I know how long the hours are. And I think writing about dinner is probably the best job in restaurants.
Okay. And if you ever had a change of career, Jay, what would it be?
If I had a change of career, I like to imagine that I would be a gigging jazz pianist because I do play piano. But I'm not sure I'd be very good at the late nights.
Great. This has been Head to Head at Law Creative with Jay Rayner.